The sun had barely reached the tall windows of the mansion when Clara, the young heiress, stretched lazily on the velvet couch in the drawing room. The house was quiet, except for the faint ticking of a grand clock and the soft rustle of the servants going about their morning chores. Clara's life had always been filled with luxury, designer dresses, endless parties, and trips to places she had only read about in books as a child. But even with all that, she often felt a sense of boredom that she could not shake. Today she had nothing pressing to do. She wandered from room to room, seeking some distraction. In the corner of the drawing room, her mother's maid was quietly arranging flowers in a tall vase. Her young son, a quiet boy with deep brown eyes, sat nearby on a small stool, watching the sunlight spill across the marble floor. He seemed to belong nowhere in the vast mansion, a small, shy presence in the middle of the grandeur. Clara noticed him out of the corner of her eye and felt a sudden urge to tease him. She had always found it amusing to play little games with the household staff, seeing how they would react to her whims. With a playful smile, she walked over to him, her designer slippers making no sound on the polished floor. "Hey, do you play the piano?" she asked lightly, her tone more curious than serious. The boy looked up startled and nodded softly. He was not used to being noticed by the young mistress of the house, especially in such a casual way. Clara moved toward the grand piano that dominated one side of the room. It was a magnificent instrument, its black surface polished so that it reflected the sunlight in a dazzling way. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys, producing a soft, hesitant note. "Come on," she said, her eyes twinkling. "Just play something for fun. I want to see if you're any good." The boy hesitated. He had played piano for a long time, but he had always done so quietly at home, away from anyone's attention. The mansion's grand piano was intimidating, and the thought of performing in front of Clara, who seemed so confident and used to commanding attention, made his stomach tighten. He looked down at his hands, unsure, and swallowed nervously. Clara, sensing his hesitation, leaned against the piano bench. "Don't worry," she said, her voice light. "I won't laugh, just play. I'm curious." After a long pause, the boy slowly moved to the piano. His fingers hovered over the keys for a moment, and then he pressed down gently. The first note was soft, delicate, almost hesitant. But there was something about it that made Clara stop and listen. She tilted her head, suddenly aware that this was not going to be the simple, clumsy performance she had imagined. As he played, the notes began to flow more freely. His fingers moved with surprising confidence, producing melodies that were rich and full even though he was still a young boy. Clara's amusement started to fade, replaced by curiosity. The music was not just good, it was beautiful. It carried a feeling, a depth that made the room feel warmer and more alive. Clara stepped back a little, letting the boy have space, though she could not help but glance at him from time to time. He was completely absorbed in the music, his eyes occasionally closing as he felt the notes under his fingers. There was no pretense, no effort to impress anyone, just pure, honest playing. The room seemed to transform around him. Even the maid paused in her work, standing quietly to listen, her hands frozen in the middle of arranging flowers. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. Each note seemed to carry a story, a hidden emotion that neither Clara nor anyone else had expected from the boy. The music flowed from gentle whispers to bold statements, soft harmonies to dramatic crescendos. Clara found herself sitting down on the couch again, completely absorbed. Forgetting her boredom and her playful intentions, she realized she had underestimated him. In her world, talent like this was rare and often bought, trained, and polished for appearances. But here, in the quiet morning sunlight, she was witnessing something genuine and unpolished yet extraordinary. It was raw and real, something that could not be taught or faked. She felt a mixture of surprise and admiration. The boy, unnoticed for so long, had suddenly filled the entire room with his music. When the last note lingered in the air, Clara remained silent for a moment, unsure what to say. The boy's hands hovered over the keys, waiting for a reaction. Then she clapped softly at first, then more firmly. The sound echoed through the room, breaking the spell, and the boy looked up, his eyes wide with relief and a hint of pride. "That was incredible," Clara said, her voice a mix of wonder and disbelief. "I didn't know anyone could play like that. Especially not like you." The boy blushed and looked down, embarrassed but pleased. He had never received praise like this from anyone, let alone the young heiress who seemed to live in a completely different world. He whispered a quiet, "Thank you," not trusting his voice to carry the full weight of his gratitude. Clara leaned back, her eyes thoughtful. She had asked him to play for fun, not expecting anything extraordinary. But now she could not stop thinking about the music, the depth, and the emotion he had put into it. For the first time in a long while, she felt a spark of genuine interest, a curiosity that was not born out of boredom or amusement, but out of real admiration. She realized that she wanted to know more about him, not just as a servant's child, but as a person with talent and dreams. She wanted to see what else he could do, what stories his music could tell. And for the boy, the morning sunlight, the polished piano, and the playful request from Clara had opened a door to a world he had only dreamed of, a world where his music could be seen and heard, not just imagined in the quiet corners of his home. That morning marked the beginning of something neither of them had anticipated. For Clara, it was the discovery of a hidden marvel in her own household. For the boy, it was the first step into a future that could finally embrace his talent, a future that seemed to stretch far beyond the small, humble life he had known. And as he returned to his small stool, the room still echoing with the last notes of his music, both of them understood that something had changed forever, even if they could not yet see how profound it would become. After the morning sunlight had faded and the shadows began to stretch across the polished floors of the mansion, the boy found himself sitting quietly in his small room, still thinking about the unexpected moment in the drawing room. He could not stop replaying the sound of the piano, the way the notes had floated from his fingers and filled the space. It had been different from the way he had played at home, where the piano in his small apartment had only ever heard simple tunes and the occasional song he had learned from lessons. The mansion's grand piano had felt alive under his hands, as though it were waiting for him to uncover a hidden story within it. Meanwhile, Clara could not stop thinking about the music either. She had spent the day wandering through her favorite rooms, pretending to browse through her collections of art and books, but her mind kept returning to the boy's performance. She had expected him to fumble or play something ordinary, but what she had heard was extraordinary. The way he had expressed himself through the keys, the emotion and confidence, had left her both amazed and strangely moved. Clara was not used to being surprised. She was used to controlling every detail of her world, and yet, here was a boy she barely knew, and he had managed to hold her attention completely. The next morning, Clara found herself unable to resist returning to the drawing room. She wanted to hear more. The boy was there, as usual, sitting quietly by the maid while she went about her morning chores. Clara approached him with a bright smile. "Do you want to play again?" she asked, this time with genuine curiosity instead of playful teasing. The boy hesitated, but when he saw the sincerity in her eyes, he nodded slowly. This time, when he sat at the piano, he felt a small thrill of anticipation. He began with a simple tune, delicate and soft, just to warm up. Clara listened closely, and for the first few moments she thought it might just be another simple performance. But then as he moved into the next piece, something changed. His fingers moved faster, more confidently, and the music seemed to pour out of him effortlessly. It was as though he had been holding back the day before, and now he was beginning to show the full extent of his ability. The notes filled the large room, rich and clear, carrying both strength and tenderness. Clara felt her heart lift as the music washed over her. She had never imagined that someone so young could produce such a range of emotion, that a single person could make the piano speak in ways that made her forget the luxurious surroundings of her life. She was so absorbed that she barely noticed when the maid's footsteps stopped, and she turned to listen as well. Word of the boy's talent began to spread through the household quietly. A few of the staff members who had happened to be passing by the drawing room paused to listen. Whispers of admiration floated through the corridors. Even the head butler, who rarely showed emotion, nodded approvingly as he heard the music drifting through the air. Everyone sensed that this was not just the casual pastime of a child, but something far more remarkable. Clara, realizing the boy's potential, began to change her attitude toward him. She stopped treating him like just the maid's son, and began asking questions about the music he played, the pieces he liked, and how long he had been learning. She discovered that he had been taking lessons in secret whenever he could find the time. Despite their limited means, his mother had encouraged his talent from the moment he could sit at a piano. He had practiced diligently, often at night after helping her with chores, and had only recently discovered that he could play more than just basic songs. Intrigued, Clara suggested they try something different. "Would you like to play something for me? Something you really love?" she asked. The boy hesitated, unsure if he should reveal his favorite piece, which was complex and challenging. But the encouragement in Clara's voice gave him confidence. He nodded and began to play a piece he had learned on his own, one that required both skill and emotion. As he played, the music seemed to tell a story. There were moments of gentle reflection, passages of quiet sadness, and sudden bursts of joy. Clara felt every note as though she were living it alongside him. The room was transformed, no longer just a drawing room in a mansion, but a space alive with emotion and energy. The staff who had quietly gathered were equally entranced, unable to look away from the boy as he played with a focus that seemed almost otherworldly. After the final note, a silence filled the room. It was not the kind of silence that comes from waiting, but a silence that held awe and respect. Clara could barely speak, and the boy, sensing her reaction, looked down shyly. She stood and approached him, her eyes wide with admiration. "I've never heard anything like that," she said, her voice soft but filled with wonder. "You're amazing." The boy blushed deeply, unable to respond at first. He was not used to such praise, especially not from someone like Clara. Her words carried weight, and for the first time, he felt that his talent was truly seen, not just noticed in passing. He whispered a quiet, "Thank you," his voice barely audible but sincere. Clara, feeling a sense of excitement she had not experienced before, made a sudden decision. "You should play more often," she said. "You should let more people hear your music. I want everyone to know how talented you are." The boy's eyes widened. The thought of performing for others, especially in the vast mansion filled with wealthy and important guests, was daunting. But Clara's encouragement gave him courage. Over the next few days, Clara made it her mission to learn more about the boy's abilities. She brought in music books and scores from her own collection, suggesting pieces that were challenging but beautiful. She spent hours with him, listening, asking questions, and encouraging him to explore different styles. The boy began to grow more confident with each session, his fingers dancing across the keys with increasing ease and precision. He discovered that he could play not just what was written on the page, but also improvise, creating melodies that surprised even himself. Clara watched with amazement as he transformed the piano into a voice that spoke directly to the heart, expressing feelings that words could not capture. The bond between them grew stronger, founded on mutual respect and the shared joy of music. Clara was no longer just the playful heiress. She became a true friend and supporter, genuinely invested in the boy's growth. One afternoon, Clara suggested they play together. She had some experience with the piano herself, and while not as skilled as the boy, she wanted to be part of the music. They sat side by side, and as they played, a harmony developed that neither had anticipated. The boy adapted effortlessly to her playing, filling in gaps, adjusting the tempo, and guiding the music with subtle cues. Clara felt a thrill of delight and surprise. Playing together was not just fun, it was magical. Word of their musical partnership slowly began to reach the extended household, though Clara insisted it be kept quiet from outsiders for now. The maid's son, once a shy and unnoticed child, was beginning to feel a new sense of purpose and identity. Music was no longer just a personal escape. It was becoming a way to connect with others and to be seen for who he truly was. Clara, for her part, had discovered a new passion and a newfound respect for talent that existed outside the circle of wealth and privilege she was accustomed to. As the days turned into weeks, their sessions grew longer, and the boy's skill continued to blossom. Clara made notes of the pieces he played, amazed at the complexity and beauty he could achieve at such a young age. She began to imagine the possibilities, thinking about how this hidden talent could one day be shared with the world. The idea of bringing his music to a larger audience began to take root, and she felt a sense of responsibility to help him achieve his potential. By the end of the second week, it was clear to everyone in the household that the boy was no ordinary child. His music had the power to captivate, to move people, and to create moments of shared wonder. Clara felt proud, not just of discovering him, but of the way he had embraced his gift and allowed it to flourish. The boy, in turn, felt a growing confidence, knowing that someone believed in him completely, someone who could see his talent without judgment or expectation. And so life in the mansion began to change subtly. The drawing room, Once a place of idle afternoons and quiet luxury became a space of creativity and inspiration. The boy, once unseen and unappreciated, was slowly stepping into a new world, one filled with music, admiration, and the promise of possibilities he had never dared to imagine. Clara and the boy had discovered something rare and precious together, a connection through music that neither wealth nor status could create, a bond that promised to change both of their lives in ways they could not yet fully understand. Days turned into weeks, and what had started as a playful request had now become a quiet routine that everyone in the mansion looked forward to. The boy would arrive each morning with his mother, and while she went about her duties, he would sit in the drawing room, waiting for Clara to join him. The grand piano no longer felt like a cold piece of furniture. It had become a living part of the house, filling the air with warmth and life whenever his fingers touched the keys. Clara had changed too. She was no longer the restless girl who looked for amusement in teasing others. The music had brought out a new side of her, a softer, more thoughtful one. She had learned to listen, to feel the emotion in every note. She found herself caring deeply about the boy's progress, often bringing him new sheet music, recording devices, and even books about famous composers. She wanted him to understand how great musicians had once started small, just like him. One afternoon, while the boy was practicing a difficult piece, Clara sat nearby sketching in her notebook. She wasn't drawing people or places, but waves of sound and movement inspired by his music. Every time she looked up, she saw how focused he was, completely lost in what he was doing. He didn't play for attention or praise. He played because he couldn't imagine not doing it. The sight filled her with quiet admiration. As the boy's confidence grew, Clara began inviting her close friends to listen. At first, it was just one or two guests who often visited the mansion. They came expecting to be entertained by a child's simple music, but each time, they left in astonishment. The boy's playing had a power that reached people's hearts. Even those who knew nothing about music could feel it. One of the guests, a middle-aged man who taught at a nearby music academy, was deeply moved. After listening for just a few minutes, he whispered to Clara, "This boy has a gift that's rare. He plays with emotion, not just technique. He could go far if he had the right training." Clara's heart raced at those words. She had always believed the boy was special, but hearing it from a professional made it real. She thanked the man, and later that evening she couldn't stop thinking about what he said. For the first time, she began to imagine a bigger future for the boy, a future beyond the walls of the mansion. The next morning, she shared the idea with him. "How would you feel about learning from a real music teacher?" she asked gently. The boy looked at her with wide eyes. "A real teacher?" he repeated softly. "Someone who teaches musicians?" Clara nodded, smiling. "Yes, someone who can help you get even better." "You deserve that chance," he didn't know what to say. The thought of studying music formally felt like an impossible dream. His mother had always done her best to encourage him, but lessons like that were far beyond what they could afford. Now, standing in the bright drawing room with Clara's kind eyes on him, he felt both excitement and fear. When Clara's parents learned of her plan, their reactions were mixed. Her father, a serious man who rarely got involved in household matters, raised an eyebrow. "You want to pay for the maid's son to take music lessons?" he asked. Clara didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said firmly. "He's talented. You should have heard him play. He could be someone great one day." Her father looked unconvinced at first, but after hearing the story from the music teacher himself, he agreed. "If he's truly gifted," he said thoughtfully, "then it would be a shame not to give him a chance." And so, arrangements were made. The boy began taking lessons with a respected instructor from the city. Clara was there for his first session, sitting quietly in the corner while the teacher tested his skills. The boy was nervous at first, his hands trembling slightly as he played. But once he began, the nerves faded and his natural ability took over. The teacher listened intently, then smiled. "You have something very special," he said. "We can build on this." That day marked a new beginning. The boy started visiting the city twice a week for lessons, often accompanied by Clara. She enjoyed watching his excitement as he learned new techniques, new pieces, and new ways to express himself through music. He absorbed everything like a sponge, practicing tirelessly at home and at the mansion. As his skills grew, Clara began to notice how people looked at him differently. The staff treated him with quiet respect, Guests who once ignored him now stopped to listen. Even her parents occasionally paused outside the drawing room, drawn by the sound of his music. He was no longer just the maid's son. He was becoming someone remarkable, but with every step forward, the boy also felt pressure. He didn't want to disappoint Clara or his mother. There were moments when he doubted himself, when he struggled with a difficult passage or failed to master a new technique. During one of those moments, he sat at the piano, his hands frozen above the keys, frustration welling up inside him. Clara noticed immediately. "What's wrong?" she asked gently. He shook his head, staring at the sheet music. "I can't get it right. No matter how much I try, it just doesn't sound good enough." Clara smiled softly. "You're being too hard on yourself. Music isn't about perfection. It's about feeling. Every great musician has moments like this. You just have to keep going." Her words seemed to reach him. He took a deep breath, relaxed his hands, and began again. This time, instead of focusing on each note, he let the music flow naturally. It wasn't perfect, but it was beautiful. When he finished, Clara clapped softly, pride shining in her eyes. "See," she said, "that's the sound of someone who believes in what they play." Their friendship deepened through these moments. Clara often found herself reflecting on how much she had learned from him. His determination, humility, and love for music had changed the way she saw the world. He in turn saw her not as a wealthy girl from a different world, but as someone who truly cared. Months passed, and the boy's name began to circulate among musicians in the city. His teacher often mentioned him with admiration, saying that his talent was unlike anything he had seen in years. Soon, an opportunity arose. A small recital at the city's music hall, where promising young musicians could perform for an audience. When Clara told the boy about it, his first reaction was fear. "Me, in front of all those people?" he said, his voice trembling slightly. Clara smiled reassuringly. "You're ready, and I'll be there with you. You've worked so hard for this moment." The days leading up to the recital were filled with practice. The boy spent every spare moment at the piano, refining every piece he planned to play. Clara watched, offering encouragement when he grew tired or uncertain. The night before the event, she found him sitting quietly, staring at the keys. "Are you nervous?" she asked. He nodded. "A little. What if they don't like it?" She placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "They will, because when you play, people feel something. That's what makes you special." The day of the recital arrived. The music hall was grand and filled with people. The boy stood backstage, his heart pounding. He could hear the faint murmur of the audience, the shuffling of programs, and the echo of footsteps on the wooden stage. When his name was announced, he took a deep breath and walked out, his small frame dwarfed by the size of the piano and the vastness of the room. He sat down, closed his eyes for a brief moment, and began to play. The first few notes were soft and uncertain, but soon the familiar comfort of the music took over. His fingers moved gracefully, each note weaving into the next like a story unfolding. The hall grew silent, every person captivated by the sound. Clara watched from the front row, her hands clasped tightly. She felt tears sting her eyes as she saw how confident he had become. The shy boy who once hesitated to touch the piano now commanded the stage with ease. When he finished, there was a moment of silence. Then the entire hall erupted into applause. The sound was overwhelming. The boy looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief, and then broke into a shy, grateful smile. He stood, bowed politely, and glanced toward Clara, who was clapping the loudest of all. That night, as they rode home, neither spoke much. The silence between them was filled with unspoken emotions, pride, joy, and the quiet realization that this was only the beginning. The boy had stepped into a new chapter of his life, one that promised a future shaped by his music and the kindness that had helped it bloom. Clara looked out of the window at the passing lights and thought about how much both their lives had changed since that first day. What began as a simple request had become something far greater, a friendship that crossed boundaries, a discovery that talent could come from anywhere, and a shared journey that neither of them would ever forget. After the night of the recital, everything began to change for the boy. The small performance that had seemed like a simple opportunity turned out to be a turning point. People in the audience had been deeply moved by his music, and word spread quickly. Within days, the music teacher received calls from others who wanted to know more about the young pianist who played with such emotion. The boy didn't fully understand the impact he had made, but Clara did. She saw how people's faces lit up when they spoke about him, how even strangers had been touched by what they heard. Back at the mansion, life seemed almost the same on the surface. The same polished floors, the same quiet mornings, and the same grand piano waiting in the drawing room. But beneath it all, there was something different now. Everyone looked at the boy differently. The staff treated him with admiration, his mother walked a little taller, and Clara felt a deep sense of pride whenever she watched him play. One morning, Clara's father invited a few influential guests to the house for a private gathering. Among them were people who loved the arts, composers, musicians, and even a few investors who supported young talent. Clara saw it as the perfect opportunity to let the boy perform again. When she told him about it, he grew quiet. All those people. They're important, aren't they? He asked softly. Clara smiled gently. Yes, but don't think about that. Just play like you always do. Play from your heart. The day of the gathering arrived and the mansion buzzed with quiet excitement. The guests admired the art, sipped tea, and discussed their latest projects. When it was time for the music, Clara introduced the boy with pride. This is someone I believe you'll remember, she said, her voice filled with warmth. The boy sat down at the piano, his hands trembling slightly. For a moment he hesitated, his eyes scanning the crowd. Then, as always, the moment his fingers touched the keys, everything else faded away. The room grew silent. The melodies he played were gentle but powerful, full of feeling and grace. He poured every emotion he had into the music, the gratitude he felt, the dreams he carried, and the quiet hope that this moment would lead somewhere beyond his imagination. When the final note faded, there was a long pause before the applause came. It was louder and longer than anything he had heard before. Some of the guests even stood to clap. Clara felt tears gather in her eyes as she looked at him. He had not just played beautifully, he had connected with everyone in the room. After the performance, one of the guests, a well-known music producer, approached Clara's father. That boy, he said thoughtfully, he has something rare. You can't teach what he has. It's pure. The producer offered to help arrange opportunities for the boy to perform in the city, perhaps even in national competitions. Clara's father listened carefully and, for the first time, truly understood that the Maid's son was more than a talented child. He was a prodigy. The days that followed were full of excitement and planning. The boy's teacher worked harder with him, helping him prepare for upcoming performances. Clara's family supported him fully, ensuring he had the best instruments and lessons available. Clara herself was by his side through it all, offering encouragement and friendship. She loved seeing him grow more confident, watching how he carried himself with quiet dignity despite the attention. But not everything was easy. Fame brought pressure. People began to expect perfection from him, and every mistake felt heavier than before. Sometimes when the lessons were over and the house was quiet, he would sit alone by the piano, staring at the keys. Clara would find him there, lost in thought. You're thinking too much again, she would say softly. He would smile faintly. I just don't want to let anyone down. She would shake her head. You won't. You just have to remember why you started. You play because you love it, not because people expect you to. Those words stayed with him. Each time he played, he tried to forget the noise of the world and focus on the music that came from his heart. It wasn't always easy, but with Clara's encouragement, he managed to keep his spirit alive. Months passed, and his talent grew even more. He began to perform at larger events, and each time the response was overwhelming. People would stop him afterward, wanting to shake his hand, ask questions, or simply tell him how moved they were by his music. His story, a boy from a modest background discovered by chance, touched everyone who heard it. One evening, after a particularly grand performance in the city, the boy and Clara sat together in the mansion garden. The air was cool and the stars shimmered above them. Clara looked at him with quiet pride. Do you realize what you've done? She asked. You've changed your life and mine too. He looked down shyly. You're the one who made it possible. If you hadn't asked me to play that day, none of this would have happened. Clara smiled softly. Maybe, but it was your talent that brought us here. You just needed a chance to be heard. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the distant sound of the city. The boy looked thoughtful. Sometimes I wonder what's next, he said. I've come so far, but it still feels like the beginning. Clara nodded. That's because it is. You're only just starting to show the world what you can do. The boy smiled, but deep down he knew there would be challenges ahead. Talent could open doors, but it couldn't protect him from the difficulties that came with success. Still, he felt ready to face whatever was next, knowing that Clara and his mother believed in him. A few weeks later, the producer arranged for him to perform at a major concert event. It would be his biggest audience yet, hundreds of people, including critics and professional musicians. When he learned the news, he felt both excitement and fear. "What if I make a mistake?" he asked Clara nervously. She looked at him with calm confidence. "Then you keep playing. Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is that you keep going." The night of the concert arrived. The grand hall was breathtaking, filled with golden light and rows of elegant guests. The boy stood backstage, feeling the weight of the moment. His mother was there too, her eyes full of pride and tears. She whispered a quiet blessing before he stepped onto the stage. When he sat at the piano, he took a deep breath and let his mind go quiet. He began to play. The opening notes were soft like a whisper, but soon the music grew stronger, fuller. It was as though he was telling the story of his life, the struggles, the dreams, the kindness that had guided him. The audience was completely silent, listening as if they didn't want to miss a single note. As he played, Clara watched from the front row. She could feel every emotion in the music, the hope, the gratitude, the strength. By the time he reached the final note, she was in tears. The applause that followed was thunderous, filling the entire hall. The boy stood, bowing deeply, and for a moment all he could see was a blur of faces and lights. He looked for Clara, and when their eyes met, they both smiled, a smile that said everything words could not. That night, after the performance, people surrounded him with praise and offers. Music schools wanted to sponsor him, concert organizers wanted to book him, and journalists wanted to tell his story. It was overwhelming, but Clara stayed close, helping him navigate it all. She knew fame could change people, but she also believed in his humble heart. As the days went on, the boy continued to perform, learning and growing with each experience. His music reached people far beyond the city, even being broadcast on the radio. Listeners who had never seen him in person were moved to tears by his playing. He became a symbol of hope, a reminder that talent and kindness could rise from anywhere. Through it all, Clara remained his closest friend and supporter. She organized his schedules, attended his rehearsals, and reminded him to rest when he pushed himself too hard. Their bond deepened, not through grand gestures but through quiet understanding. She often said that his music had changed her life, teaching her to see beauty beyond wealth or privilege. And every time he sat at the piano, the boy remembered where it all began, the morning when Clara had asked him to play for fun. What started as a playful moment had become a journey that neither of them could have predicted. The mansion, once filled with silence and routine, now echoed with the sound of dreams taking shape. He knew there was still much ahead to learn, to play, and to feel, but as long as he had music and the people who believed in him, he was ready for anything. The piano had given him more than notes and melodies. It had given him a life filled with purpose, connection, and the unshakable belief that sometimes one small chance is all it takes to change everything. Months passed after the grand concert, and the boy's name began to appear in newspapers and on posters. People called him a young genius, a gift to music. But for him, fame never felt real. It was the quiet moments at the piano when the rest of the world disappeared that truly mattered. He never forgot where he came from, the small servant's room where his mother worked long hours, or the dusty piano that first started his journey. Clara continued to stand by him. Their friendship had become something rare and steady. She saw how he stayed humble, no matter how many people praised him. Sometimes, she caught him looking at the grand piano in her family's home with the same wonder he had on the first day he touched it. That look always reminded her why she had believed in him in the first place. One morning, a letter arrived at the mansion. It was an invitation to perform overseas, at one of the most prestigious music festivals in Europe. Clara's father handed it to the boy with a proud smile. "You deserve this," he said warmly. "You'll be representing our country." The boy's hands trembled as he held the letter. "I've never even left the city before," he whispered. Clara smiled. "Then it's time you do." Preparations began quickly. The producer helped arrange travel, sponsors, and everything else needed. His mother was overwhelmed with emotion. Her son, the maid's boy, traveling to another country to play for the world's finest audience. She packed his things herself, tears falling silently as she folded each shirt. "Just remember who you are," she told him. "And remember where you came from." The day he left, the entire household gathered to see him off. Even the staff who had once overlooked him now stood proudly, waving goodbye. Clara hugged him tightly before he boarded the car. "Play for yourself," she whispered. Not for them. The journey was long, and when he finally reached Europe, everything felt different. The streets were older, the air colder, and the people spoke languages he barely understood. But when he sat down at a piano during rehearsal, all his fears melted away. Music didn't need translation. It was the same everywhere, honest, emotional, and full of life. The festival was grander than anything he had seen before. Famous musicians, composers, and critics from all over the world attended. Back home, Clara followed every update in the newspapers, waiting anxiously for news. When the night of his performance arrived, he felt an unusual calm. The concert hall was massive, lit by golden chandeliers. The audience waited in silence as he walked on stage. He bowed politely and sat at the piano. For a moment, he closed his eyes and remembered everything. The maid's quarters, his mother's smile, Clara's laughter, the first time his fingers touched the keys. Then, he began to play. The music that flowed from him that night was unlike anything he had ever played before. It was deep, emotional, and full of stories only he could tell. Every note carried a piece of his journey, the hardship, the hope, the love, and the faith of those who believed in him. The audience listened in complete stillness. Some leaned forward. Others closed their eyes, lost in the emotion of it. When the final note echoed into silence, the hall erupted in applause. People stood, cheering and clapping, some with tears in their eyes. He rose, bowed deeply, and smiled, a quiet, humble smile. In that moment, he didn't think of fame or success. He thought of Clara, of his mother, and of how far a small act of kindness had brought him. After the performance, journalists rushed to speak with him. They asked about his training, his influences, his future plans. But when someone asked, "What inspired your music the most?" he paused. Then he said softly, "A friend who believed in me when no one else did." Back home, Clara read the newspaper article and couldn't help but cry. She felt proud beyond words. Her father noticed and smiled knowingly. "You did something good," he said. "You saw something in him that others didn't." When the boy returned home weeks later, the entire mansion celebrated. There were flowers, music, and laughter everywhere. His mother hugged him so tightly he could barely breathe. Clara stood back, watching with tears in her eyes as everyone surrounded him. When their eyes finally met, they both smiled, the same way they had after every milestone. Later that evening, after everyone had left, he found Clara sitting by the piano. The same piano that had started everything. He sat beside her quietly. "It feels strange," he said softly. "All of this attention, all of this noise. But when I play here, it still feels like home." Clara looked at him. "That's because this is where it all began. You don't need to chase the world. Let the world come to you," he smiled. "You always know what to say." For a while, they sat in silence, listening to the faint sound of crickets outside. Then, without a word, he began to play a gentle melody. It wasn't one of his famous pieces, just something simple, soft, and heartfelt. Clara closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. It was the same feeling she'd had that first day, the sense that something magical was happening right in front of her. As the last note lingered in the air, she turned to him and said, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't asked you to play that day?" He chuckled. "Maybe I'd still be sweeping floors." Clara shook her head. "No, you would have found your way. Music was always a part of you. I just gave you a moment to let it out." The boy grew quiet. "Still, I owe everything to that moment and to you." Over the next few years, his career continued to rise. He performed in grand halls around the world, but he always made time to visit home. Each visit was the same. He would sit at the same piano, his mother would bring tea, and Clara would listen as he played. The mansion, once just a symbol of wealth, had become a place of love, friendship, and dreams realized. One afternoon, after returning from a long tour, he told Clara about an idea he had. "I want to open a music school," he said. "Not for rich children, but for anyone with passion. Kids like me who never had a chance." Clara's face lit up. "That's a beautiful idea. And you can count on me to help." Together, they worked to make it happen. With the help of Clara's family and his growing network, they opened the school in a quiet part of the city. The building wasn't fancy, but it was full of life. Children of all backgrounds came to learn, their laughter filling the halls. He taught them not just technique, but emotion, how to play from the heart. Clara often visited, sitting at the back of the classroom, smiling as she watched the students play. The boy, now older and wiser, would glance at her and feel a deep sense of gratitude. Every key, every note, every child's dream. It all traced back to that one day when a girl had asked a maid's son to play for fun. Years later, when he became one of the most respected musicians in the world, people still asked about his beginnings. He would always tell the same story, not about fame, but about kindness. It started with a simple request, he'd say, smiling softly. Someone believed in me before I believed in myself. And though life had changed, one thing never did. His love for music that came from the heart. The mansion still stood tall and the piano still sat by the window, waiting for the next pair of hands to bring it to life. Every time he returned, he would sit there, close his eyes, and play, not for the crowd, not for fame, but for the joy that started it all. Because in the end, it wasn't just a story about a boy who became a legend. It was about friendship, belief, and the magic that happens when someone sees the light in another person and helps it shine. And as his music continued to echo across the world, the story of that one simple act of kindness lived on, inspiring countless others to believe that greatness can begin anywhere, even in the most unexpected places.